from the point of view of research output. And the quality of the papers coming from China are outstanding. And actually, they are dwarfing what we're doing in the US. Not just one or two things, a lot of them. And the narrative, the pre-COVID narrative was in the US, let's prevent them from stealing from us because they are advancing rapidly, stealing from us. Stealing from us? They're ahead of us. It's really very bad for the nation not to be aware of what our biggest competitor is doing, not to even have a sense of it. And I think that's very, very critical. It seems to me that there is a war between the US government and universities. If we were born in that system, many of us, certainly people in Washington, believe that it's kind of by divine nature that we're going to always be the strongest country in science and technology because that's the only thing we know.
Hi, everyone. This is the Tech Surge Deep Tech podcast presented by Celesta Capital. Each episode, we spotlight issues and voices at the intersection of emerging technologies, company building, and venture investment. I'm Michael Marks, founding managing partner at Celesta. If you enjoy Tech Surge, subscribe and leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Visit techsurgepodcast.com to sign up for our newsletter and find our video episodes on YouTube. Okay, today we have a very special guest, Dr. Rafael Reif, the MIT President Emeritus, and a vocal leader for building U.S. technology leadership. You were quite prolific during your tenure as MIT President, bringing MIT courses online to reach tens of millions of people around the world, championing AI and climate research, and helping to build up support for entrepreneurs, including overseeing the launch of MIT's own venture fund and startup incubator called The Engine. You've been a distinguished member of the MIT faculty for more than 40 years, with far too many awards and accolades to count. You've also had a big role in the semiconductor industry, serving on the board of TSMC, as well as serving as an advisor to semiconductor equipment company Applied Materials. In addition, we have been friends for a long time. Rafael and I served together on the board of Schlumberger for many years, which is where we got to know each other. So, Rafael, thank you for spending some time with us today. I'm really excited to talk with you.
Michael, thank you for having me. With such introduction, I'd rather you keep talking and I stay quiet.
All right, so here we go. To kick things off, you've talked a lot about how university research is the engine of innovation in high-tech economies. In your view, can you tell us what are the most important things that the universities provide to the high-tech economies? Is it talent, IP, culture? What are the different things they provide?
Well, let's start with the talent. I think, we get terrific talent. All universities do. And, we put them through the test here and they're ready to go to industry and do some good things there. That's the most important thing. But in addition to that, universities that are lucky enough to do research, they are very helpful to the economy of the U.S. I mean, there is ideas being produced, foundational ideas, foundational technologies, patents, startups, entrepreneurship. What happens in universities is very critical it's a significant part of the innovation ecosystem of the country. So those two things, educating the talent and creating the foundational technologies that industry can take off and do the wonderful things they do with it. Those are the two most important things I think universities do.
Okay, great. Well, so we'll dig in a little bit on this. You've argued that it's important to keep academic collaboration alive across borders, even with nations that are strategic competitors like China. How do we strike the balance of protecting national security concerns while still having open exchange of ideas?
Well, that's a real critical question. Look, for years, I used to go to China almost every year. I would say every year, sometimes twice a year. This is pre-pandemic. I would go and visit the high-tech companies there, and they would always basically show off the technology, all the things they were doing. I could have a good sense of what they were doing and how they were doing it. They wouldn't tell me the details, but they would show off the capabilities. In time, those became more and more and more impressive. At the beginning, it was a catch-up game. Towards the end, pre-pandemic, there was not much catching up doing. They were just doing very advanced stuff. The pandemic comes, I stopped going, and then after that comes that tension between the U.S. and China, and my travels there has been diminishing significantly. As a result, me personally do not know what's going on there, and I think if that happens with so many critical individuals in this country, it's really very bad for the nation not to be aware of what our biggest competitor is doing, not to even have a sense of it. And I think that's very, very critical. Of course, collaboration is always good when it's pre-competitive. We don't touch industrial stuff, but they do amazing things. We do amazing things, and working together, we can do even bigger things. But beyond that, just the awareness of what they are doing is critical, and we just do not have much of a clue.
That really leads to my next question. So many people are worried about the threat from China, and we can talk about countries besides China, but that one's kind of in the news, of course. So a lot of people are concerned about the threat from China around key areas like AI, which everybody talks about, but also drug development and some other areas. So while you just said it's hard to know, do you have an assessment of the state of U.S. science and technology in terms of competitiveness? I mean, are there areas where we're falling behind? Are we at risk of getting worse in that situation, falling farther behind? Do you have a view of that?
Yeah, not a direct view of that, but I have a view from the point of view of research output of papers. And the research, the number of papers and the quality of the papers coming from China are outstanding. And actually, they are dwarfing what we're doing in the US. So that's the sense that, boy, they're doing something exciting, not just one or two things, a lot of them. And we don't even know exactly how they got there, but we know they are there already. And I think the narrative, the pre-COVID narrative was in the US, let's prevent them from stealing from us because they are advancing rapidly, stealing from us. Stealing from us? They're ahead of us in quite a few areas. Looking at the publications, they are ahead of us. So it is better for us to stay connected with them and to find ways to collaborate so that we can move somewhat faster as well.
Well, that's a very thoughtful answer. One of the companies we have at Celesta is a company called Prellis, which has a platform for developing drugs, faster and more efficiently than the industry. And all anybody in that industry talks about is the Chinese, about how fast they are, how inexpensive they are, how clever they are, as being the real competitors in the future. And that's a new thing from a drug development standpoint. So I guess the next thing to talk about is what do we do about it? So obviously, it's in the news every damn day about drastic cuts from government programs to the universities with DOGE and other things. You've written op-eds warning about the long-term consequences, to American technology leadership if we cut research funding. Can you talk about that? About why is the federal funding necessary? I mean, one can make the argument that these universities have a lot of capital; they could do their own funding. So, what is important about the government funding, and what impact is the lack of government funding or cutbacks, going to be in terms of innovation and tech innovations, U.S. leadership, so on?
Look, there are things that the U.S. needed to do to compete with China 2 months ago, up to 2 months ago. Now, with what's going on with the government, I view that they are destroying some of our assets, and we still have to fix what we were not doing that well before. So let me assume that nothing happened, and with federal government funding continues. And what is the problem we have? Let me summarize in the following way. It was maybe 10 years ago or so, in one of my trips to China, I was the guest of a bunch of high-tech leaders in China. The meeting was in Beijing. Quite a few of them were from Shenzhen in the south of China. They flew to Beijing. There were a couple of them from Shanghai. And it was a very early in the Xi's presidency. And we had a very pleasant conversation. But at some point, I was to them the U.S. I was not MIT. I was not this fellow who speaks with an accent. I was the United States. And at one point, one of them stood up and said, listen, when it comes to scale, don't compete with us. We'll always beat you. And I remember thinking, man, I mean, I'm their guest. I mean, how do I react to that? How do I answer to that? And then they quickly spin and said, but when it comes to creativity, we'll never beat you. So I said, wait a minute, time out. Why were you so arrogant on the first half and so humble on the second half? And he said to me, well, because in scale, we're much bigger. We know how to do manufacture at scale and in big volume. We're expert at that. You'll never catch up to us. But when in creativity, he said to me, you are heterogeneous and we are homogeneous. You bring the best brains from the world to work together, and what you create is amazing. We'll never do that. That was 10 years ago. They may actually thinking about it differently now. But that's their perception of us. The punchline of his comment was, look, what we do great, you don't. And what you do great, we don't. Why don't we work together? And my answer to that is, well, there is this minor issue about IP protection and so forth and so on. I said, okay, we can work on that. But the point of what I'm saying is not that. Is that their perception of us is because we bring the best brains for the whole world to come here. We attract them through our universities and our research. We create amazing stuff. That's our asset. So what do we do great? Foundational technologies. That's our asset. Most of them come from universities, and then either startups come out of universities and create amazing things, or established companies license the patents, whatever. But that ecosystem works extremely well. The part that does not work as well, the economic model in China is they decide what they want to dominate in the next 5 years. And they put tremendous resources on those technologies to dominate them. They do not care whether in that process they invest too much money and lose money. It's not about a market concept, it's about dominating a technology concept. And they always get there because they are smart, they are good, and they invest. In our society, we have a different economic model. We invest to produce returns. It's a market-oriented model. The market dictates what we do and where we do it. Okay, in this market model, there are many ideas that may take a little longer than the risk capital is willing to absorb that just don't get invested. That's not their problem. They want to dominate technologies, and every one after the other, they have dominated them. Even technologies that were invented and created by us. In fact, most of them have been. The most recent one is EV batteries. A startup company coming out of MIT was too well ahead of its time. The market was not well developed. It's the lithium-ion batteries. They were developed. Eventually, they filed for bankruptcy. A company in China bought them, and now they dominate the lithium-ion batteries. I can give you example one after the other. So what is that we don't do well? How do we compete with that model? I mean, we have to understand what the competitor is doing, and we have to figure out how to beat them. I'm not suggesting we copy them, but I'm suggesting we have to recognize what they are better at us and figure out how to do it better. So that's a broader answer to your question. But I think what we do well, why is university research so important? Because we create the foundational technologies. Even they acknowledge that. Now, as I said, that's 10 years ago, and they are trying to beef up everything they're doing. And right now, I'll tell you, in AI research output, Beijing University and Tsinghua are first and second in research output. In AI, something created by these universities in this country. So they recognize our asset. We seem to take it for granted, and they are catching up even in our asset. What they do better, if assuming that they can copy or just start the technology from us, they still move them faster to the marketplace. They find ways because they dominate without the market-oriented model they have until they dominate the technology, and then, of course, they recoup all the investment. So you touched a point that I think is critical in terms of how we understand what we should do better and what they do better. Now, in our society, not only we are not even paying attention about how to compete with them, we're destroying our own asset right now. That's a different story. That we cannot assume that we're going to come up with the foundational models of the future, because we're destroying the basic infrastructure of that generation of ideas and technologies.
And we're destroying that by DOGE and the government cutbacks on funding. Is that how we're destroying it?
Yes. Well, we have right now, I think I can call it that way. It seems to me that there is a war between the U.S. government and universities.
There is.
I understand the problems that come when the U.S. government may be bothered and affected by anti-Semitism on campus. There are many different ways to having conversations to address that. I understand the concern that in the current government people have that universities are too liberal, they're not conservative enough. We can talk about that as well. But to force universities to do God knows what they want us to do with anti-Semitism and making conservative institutions out of liberal institutions, to force them by cutting or killing research funding is shooting ourselves in our feet. I just don't understand that notion. And that's what's going on right now. And I said, China is catching up with us, even with our system working as best as we can. We have to improve what we have. What these guys are doing is killing it.
Is there an opportunity either for the private sector to step in where the government funding gets cut off, or an opportunity for the universities to spend more of their own capital in this way, or does that not work?
Well, I think the private sector is investing in R&D quite well. But it's typical for them and it's logical for them to invest in R&D that improves their market position. They have a roadmap of ideas and products, and they're working in developing those ideas further. And that's what they're supposed to do. What universities are supposed to do is come up with the new foundational things, the paradigm shifts, the things that industry is not doing because they are on a roadmap, and we create opportunities for new kinds of roadmap. And that kind of research can only be really paid by public funding. The private money is not going to support that. Philanthropy may do some of it, but think of it. The dollar figure of what government funds cannot be replaced by private capital. There's not enough wealth to do that. So I don't think that's the solution. A different take on that, which is critical to me. I think all of us, you, me, most of the people we know, were born after World War II. After World War II came the Vannevar-Bush social contract between government funding and universities. And that, together with other things, made the U.S. universities a superpower in science and technology. That has existed for all these years. Since we were born in that system, many of us, certainly people in Washington, believe that it's kind of by divine nature that we're going to always be the strongest country in science and technology, because that's the only thing we know. We have not seen we have not have any idea of what it is when the most exciting gadgets, the most exciting medical treatments would come from China. We are not used to that. In fact, when we see them coming from there, it's only because they stole from us. We just don't have a sense that we may not be at the top anymore. And as a result, the center of gravity of the world is not so gradually moving from US-centric, where everybody watches our movies and speaks Spanish and all that, speaks English, Spanish, I wish, it's English. This is what we're used to. It's really moving east. Just look at the largest economies in the world now, and projected to be in the next 10 years, is US and China, but it's India, Japan. This is all moving east. We need to understand that change and figure out how to accommodate either to that change or try to maintain us to be the strongest. And that requires a lot of thinking on those issues we're talking about here.
All right, well, I have a follow-up to a certain part of that, which is immigration policy. But before I go there, if you were having that conversation today that you had 10 years ago, what do you think they would say? Would they still say that we're more creative than them, or do you think they would say that those days are over?
Well, that they still would say that the heterogeneous model of creativity is better than homogeneous. But I think they would say, or they should say, is that they have managed to overcome the lack of heterogeneity, because now they are successfully recruiting, thanks to Trump #1 and now Trump #2 administration, successfully recruiting quite a few Chinese scientists going back to China. That's their way to solve, not necessarily coming from the best brains of the world. They sent us the best brains, and they just are having enough of this country. These are terrific people that are here, excited, living in a country they love also, but doing research. You cut off the reason they are here, they're going to go, researchers go where they can do research. So back they go.
Well, that's a little bit depressing, and this isn't going to make it any easier. Let's talk about what's happening with immigration policy. So a big part of the fuel for America's tech leadership comes from international students and researchers. You just talked about that. Over half of U.S. PhDs in technical fields like engineering and computer science are earned by international students. Now we're canceling student visas, making it much harder to immigrate here. The question is, are we putting our leadership in jeopardy with these immigration policies and rhetoric? And I know what your answer is going to be, but can you flesh this out a little bit? Because this is not good news for this country.
As I said a moment ago, Americans are not smartest because we're Americans, right? I mean, there is a Gaussian distribution of smart people or talented people in all societies, and we have our share of those, and China has a share of those. But by share, there are many more people, so they have many more. Well, how do we in the U.S. statistically tinker with that? Well, we tinker with that by bringing the best talented from all over the world to come to us. They were not born here. They don't come from the Gaussian distribution. They are imported. That has been, as you said earlier, that has been the secret of our success. And that's the part that we just cannot kill too. So I think there are two issues that you just identify with your questions that I strongly believe we need to do. Number one is just not only stop harassing universities on research funding, harass them on anti-Semitism, harass them on cultural, liberal, but not on research funding. This is the heart of what we are here for as a country too. So maintain the research funding and in fact increase it. Talking about increasing, let me just give a little parenthesis. There was a bill that was passed in Congress called the Chips and Science Act. Chips is about bringing manufacturing to America. Science was about advancing all the technologies that we're not advancing today, advancing them faster, and creating the new technologies of the future. It's basically creating a new kind of semiconductor transistor that was invented at Bell Labs back in 1948. Come up with that kind of thinking. China, by the way, recently announced a similar program to the science part of the Chips and Science Act. They just announced it like 2-3 weeks ago. In our beloved country, our bipartisan Congress supported the bill, approved the bill, and appropriated the money for the chips part, not for the science part. Very little of it went to the science part. So basically, we are not realizing we are in a competition. When Sputnik happened, all of America just became crazy. This is not possible. So the Russians or Soviets are catching up with us. We got to invest heavily on science, and we did. This seems to be happening somewhere else. It's not, and we cannot believe it because Americans are supposed to run everything in technology. The Chinese might be stealing. So we are not responding. So number one, not only we have to maintain what we have and maintain it well and support it and respect it and recognize it, but infuse much more money. This is not enough. And the science part of the Chips and Science Act had that. I know that because I was heavily involved with that. There is enough money there for us to take off. One thing we need to do is to start is fund that. You approved it. As a bill, it's a law in Congress. Fund the act. But the second thing is to worry about the immigration situation. Most of the students who come here from abroad, most of them want to stay, including those from China. We make it very hard for them to stay. Why? We need them. So I think that's the second part that is critical, a recognition of that. And there is quite a few people in Washington who don't see that. And those two things together are part of what we have to recognize and emphasize if we really want to stay as the country we have been for the last 80 years or so.
Well, I'm pretty sure I know what your answer is coming on this, but you yourself are an immigrant. You immigrated from Venezuela. So two questions there: why, and how are you feeling about the deportations that are happening now?
Let me just answer the second question first. The whole situation of the migrants, many of the migrants in the last few years are coming from my home country, from Venezuela. Many of the migrants for quite a while actually were given a place to sleep at the airport, right here at Logan Airport. So I could see them when I travel. It just broke my heart. I mean, what they go through to make it here, it just broke my heart. There was a period in which I couldn't even read the news anymore because I just couldn't take the pain. And that's just all the migrants coming here. Now, this is Venezuela or for many countries in South America, they are living a very tough situation back home, and they go through incredible pain to make it here. That's another set of immigration that we don't recognize that helps the country. These are people who are driven, who are ambitious, who are looking for a better life, and are going through everything to try to make it. These are not people who are comfortably here in this country, just making it here through horrible situations. So it's very painful. And now to see them being shipped back and stuff, I understand all the reasons for all that, but at the same time, I've talked to enough people in the commercial sector who need them. They are people who are doing a good job here, and they are trying their best to do a good job because they went through hell to be here, and I don't want to jeopardize it. So of course it breaks my heart. On why I came here, well, I didn't come here to immigrate. Actually, my goal in life in Venezuela was, as a young man, was to have a job as a professor in the University of Venezuela. That's what I wanted. That's what I wanted to do in life: be a professor in a Venezuela university. But to be a professor there is hard. You have to know somebody who knows somebody. So I thought that since I didn't know anybody, maybe the way to do it is to get a PhD and to then come back. So I came to America to get a PhD and then to go back home. One thing led to another. I postponed the trip and then I ended up staying here. Once I came to MIT, I was not exactly enamored of winters and snow and stuff like that. Eventually, I learned to love it, but I was enamored with the place. I mean, this was the perfect place for nerds like me. I enjoy being here, and then I stayed.
Well, I'm certainly glad that you did. Just one more question before we get onto a little bit more commercial aspects, a little bit less political, but clearly the major universities in the country are under attack. I mean, you know that. You've been writing a lot about it, and having the universities be an enemy is not a recipe for great technological innovation. Are there things the universities can do to fight back here? I see just recently, I think Harvard, said they're gonna continue to do the things that they've done and so on. Is there a new role for universities or a different way to think about this, or is the hope just to wait it out, hope it gets better?
I don't think we can wait it out. I mean, I think to me, that's a much easier question to answer, Michael, because I'm not on the job anymore. So
Right.
I'm not suffering making that decision. But personally, I applaud Harvard to what they did. I was thrilled and extremely joyful when I learned that they want to fight. Universities are obviously afraid. They cannot lose federal funding because then basically they are going to go out of business. And this is just basically destroying what we have to construct a new university system with conservative way of thinking. I mean, that whole thing is bizarre and it's crazy, but that's what's going on right now.
Yeah.
I think the only hope there is just to fight back, to sue, to go to the courts. These things will take a while, but I cannot believe that the courts in this country are going to say that the president can decide on his own or her own that because I don't like the way this university thinks, I'm going to just decide that they don't get any research funds. That logic, I don't see which part of the Constitution approves that. So I think we have to fight. Now, it's an easy thing for me to say, and I was pushing and thinking about that from the very beginning. but I'm not the president anymore. I don't have a board, and I don't have a university that may go bankrupt as a result of a decision like that. But that's what I think we have to do.
I applaud the fact that you write about this stuff and you speak out about it. It's certainly a very difficult problem. All right, let's switch. Talk a little bit more commercial aspects. So, kick things off. You talked a lot about university research, the engine of innovation, high tech economies. Now we have all this discussion about chips and semiconductors, and obviously universities have played a role in that. But you're on the board of TSMC, which many people argue is one of the most important companies in the world today. And I just want to ask your view about some of these things, understanding that I'm not asking for any inside information. It's a public company, obviously, but you have an insight to this. And so the question is, you and I once personally talked about this, that the TSMC is building fabs in other countries, in Arizona, as we know. I think you said Japan and Germany and so on. And there's been some discussion about, potential alignment with Intel and so on. How do you see this whole geopolitical thing playing out in terms of, is it possible for TSMC, Intel, global foundries to create, competitive fabs in other countries where it may be difficult to get the trained people and it's a lot of capital and so on? How are you thinking about that issue?
The chip manufacturing business is a different kind of manufacturing, in the sense that if you're going to manufacture nails, the nails look the same now as 50 years ago and 100 years from now. Nails are nails. You establish a way to manufacture. You always try to worry about how to do it cheaper so you can stay competitive, but you don't change much besides the manufacturing approach to make it cheaper. In technology, it's very different. I mean, every 2 years or so, you come up with something new. So heading a factory is not enough. You have to have the machinery, the technology, the tools behind to do research to advance that technology. So building factories abroad, that's not a big deal. In the scheme of things, it's not a big deal. You need the machines, you need the tools, you need the people. But my point is that you can transport a technology using the jargon terminology and the technology node to another country. But that's all what that country can do is building those kinds of nails, that technology node for many years. But in 2-3 years, there is a new node. So if you want to stay in the cutting edge, that particular fab that you built is not going to cut it anymore. It becomes now more and more a legacy fab. So building products with older technology that is still very valid, is still very useful, and those are still the kinds of technologies that we use in cars and in all sorts of machineries. I mean, we're surrounded by chips on anything we touch, but most of them are legacy node chips. So those kinds of factories can be built in other countries. Build one that is on the cutting edge and stays there. That's a little more complicated because you need to keep advancing it, and it's easier to do if you have an infrastructure of support to advance the research in that same country. So in terms of companies building factories in America, I think that's great. It solves a lot of the supply chain issues that in fact, the CHIPS Act wanted to fix. But it's gonna, unless we have an infrastructure of support to keep advancing the technology in our country, that factory will come and it's gonna stay on that node, and in 10 years will be a legacy node.
So how does TSMC stay ahead of everybody? I mean, what's the secret? Because you've talked about appropriately that it takes tremendous innovation to advance these nodes in semiconductor. How does TSMC pull this off?
Look, they really work hard at it. There is no secret sauce other than the ingenuity of the engineers there. They really go at it, and they know how to do it. I mean, there is a lot of quote unquote secret of the trade.
Sure.
But all those factories that do foundries, they all know the secrets of the trade. TSMC just knows how to do it better. It's simply ingenuity. I mean, the kind of solutions they come up with, it's just remarkable. But it's just that, it's ingenuity. It's the brain power at its best.
I mean, clearly they've done an unbelievable job. Is there value to a relationship between TSMC and Intel, which is not at the same level of innovation? Are there geopolitical opportunities that make sense there? I mean, how do you think about that stuff?
Well, that's a little more complex because that enters into comments into areas that I don't feel comfortable commenting.
Sure, I understand.
But the U.S. needs to think about having a foundry that does advanced technology here in this country. Ideally, that's what the U.S. probably should think about. And ideally, that place could have been Intel. It's not going to be Intel, and perhaps Intel with some help can become that place. But the U.S. does need something like that, just simply for national security reasons. The relationship the U.S. is with Taiwan and with the TSMC is excellent. And I think from that standpoint, one would argue, why do we need that in this country? But for all the right reasons, it's a good idea to try to have that here. And if that place could be Intel, I think it's worth exploring that.
I really appreciate that. One last thing we wanted to talk about. It plays a little bit into the political situation, but when one of the initiatives you started at MIT was the creation of a venture fund and a startup incubator, or what you said were tough tech ideas, similar to what we now call deep tech. Can you tell us what gap you were trying to fill by doing that? Was it meant to address underserved areas of technology? Was there insufficient capital? We talked about capital formation. What happens if the government cuts back? And can the universities do more stuff like you did at this engine at MIT?
Remember that earlier I said that there are some things we do very well and some things we have a gap there that we have to do better. And this was my attempt at the time that I created the engine to address that gap. And the issue is very simple. And in fact, by the way, I think when I did that, Michael, I had not met you because I would have gone to you. But I went to some other people in West Coast that I knew, and I told them the problem that I saw. And they basically just said, that's not real. We're not interested. What I saw was the following. I saw tremendous science-based ideas, I don't know exactly how else to call them, coming out from MIT. People doing their work, their research, come up with fabulous ideas that not only could be commercially successful, they would benefit society, benefit humankind. I mean, just the good things we need them to do. We can talk examples in a moment, but basically, things that would make a big difference. But the risk capital was not willing to invest in those because it would take about 10 years to see whether they would work. It's much easier to fund a digital company in which you have some milestones, and if you don't make the milestone, you pull the plug, and you lost some money, but not a big deal. When you're doing something in which things take a while, people are very afraid to put money into that. And what I wanted is to create a way to make patient capital available for these young companies to get going and get to a point in which they are within the quote-unquote 5-year range of risk capital and then get the big money. And I tested the idea. I said I went to the West Coast to test the idea. I was just run out of offices. I mean, nobody cared to. We don't care about that. Ideas that are good for humanity and stuff like that, forget about it. But I went locally to some people, and they were interested. They said, I'm going to get a return on my investment, but it doesn't have to be right away. I'm willing to wait. I'm just willing to put a small fraction of my money into this fund just to see what good it can do. And that's how I raised the money for that, and that was the purpose. So all of the companies are that kind of company. The best example is Commonwealth Fusion System. I mean, that's the company that is doing fusion for energy. The key idea for investors in the area around MIT is that they wanted to see, they were more welcoming of the idea that putting a very small fraction of their funds into a fund that is not only high risk. The risk is more or less like everything else, but you have to wait sometime longer. It's just a more patient capital, and they were willing to do it. And the reason they were willing to do it is because they wanted to see those companies in New England creating jobs here. I mean, it was just a job production for the economy, for local economy. Eventually attracted funds from many other countries as well, not just the U.S. So that was the purpose of the engine, address that gap. And going back to what I said earlier, when China wants to dominate that technology, they don't care about how much money they are losing. They want to get to dominate it. We have to care. We have a different model. We have to care. We want the return. And this is the part that I was trying to figure out. How do I unlock this thing? Can we do something like this and prove that it works?
So how did it turn out? Can you give us an example of something that was really cool that came out of that?
The most exciting one that grew big because not only got money from us, but got money from now real investors is Commonwealth Fusion Systems. Now there are a number of fusion companies here. And not only that, if you go to China, they have more companies than we do, more people working on that, more graduates in fusion, and more research papers on fusion. And this thing started not so long ago in only quite a few places in America. But we have our model of doing things, and well, it takes a while, but they see the future, and that's where partly is.
Well, look, fantastic that you did that. This has been a wide-ranging conversation. I really appreciate your taking the time for this. I also want to say personally that I admire your standing up for these issues. You write articles about them. You know, you have an important voice in the community that is very important with the geopolitical issues and the politicizing of our institutions. So thank you for doing that, and thank you so much for doing this. It's been very illuminating. I really appreciate it, my friend.
Michael, thank you for your kind words and for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks for tuning into the Tech Surge podcast from Celesta Capital. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to share it, subscribe, or leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. We'll be back every 2 weeks with more insights and discussions of all things deep tech.